Good morning, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk with you about Curly Lambeau. Go Packers! And you can see that I've got the right hat on and I've got the shirt, if you can kind of see it. So the Packers are such a wonderful and beloved institution here in Wisconsin. You know, Mondays when they win, feel good. Mondays when they lose, the whole state kind of gets a little bit depressed. It's quite a while ago, I don't even know, 12, 13 years ago, I wrote, here it is, a copy of Curly Lambeau, Building the Green Bay Packers. And I'm here to tell you a little bit of the story, partly in the hopes that you'll go read the book and find out more about him. Because without Curly Lambeau, I'm not sure you wouldn't have the NFL, but it sure wouldn't look the same. And you could almost make the case that you wouldn't, because he was there at the very beginning. He was there right when it started, and the Packers are one of the very few original NFL teams. All right, so let me just tell you a little bit about his story. He was born in 1898, the son of immigrants, Belgian and French families. But right from the beginning, he was a great athlete. And they would play back then. Of course, they were very poor, and they would play with a salt sack filled with sand and pebbles. Kind of just, take a cloth burlap kind of bag, and that would be their football. He played from the beginning. He loved football, though he was also a great track person, good in lots of things. And he was a star athlete in middle school. He actually broke his ankle in middle school, and that was the only injury he ever sustained in all of his football career. Now, he at East High School in Green Bay, he was also a star athlete, but it was really football that was his love. And let me just see here. I've got a little piece here because he went from East to continue playing football. He went to Notre Dame. And again, remember that back in those days, football was really just a barely organized sport. And so he was there, and he played in this newly formed sport, but he played with a man named Knute Rockne, who was the coach. And Knute Rockne is one of those famous early football people. If you're interested in football, find out about Knute Rockne. And he's called the Gipper. No, he's not called the Gipper. I'm sorry, that was someone on the team. But Knute Rockne, what he brought to football was the forward pass. Because before that, in a whole game, you might have one or two passes. Basically, people just ran at each other. Big guys, they'd run into each other, and it was just a matter of pure power, That's what the game was. And all of a sudden, with the beginning of the forward pass, it wasn't just about how big and strong you were. It was also about how fast you were, how much you could elude people down the field. So Curly played for Knute Rockne one year. Went back to Green Bay, didn't go back to Notre Dame, but he wanted to keep playing, and they had kind of pickup games, not really organized teams. And then he met a guy named George Calhoun. And George Calhoun was a sports writer, kind of a classic sports writer, cigar chewing, and he talked to Curly about maybe starting a team. And he was working for the Indian Packing Company, and the packing company decided to sponsor the team. And they won. Here we're talking about 1919, so more than 100 years ago. But they won. And they won partly because Curly was such a great passer. For example, I have got this right here. At the end of the season of this Indian packing team, they had outscored their opponents 227-24. And some people were mad about the passing, but that's the way it was. And then in 21, the Indian Packing Company was bought by the Acme Packing Company. And they heard about that there was a kind of a national football league, although at that time it was called the American Professional Association. And they joined. And that was really the beginning of the NFL. But they got kicked out because they used college players and they paid them. And that was illegal, just like it is now. And they were told on about this by a man named George Halas. And George Halas was the owner of the Chicago Bears. So George Halas basically messed with Curly Lambeau. And when you look at the rivalry between the Packers and the Bears, it goes back to that very day. They were kicked out. Curly Lambeau had to go back after some time and buy the franchise. He had to borrow the money, but then there in 21, they were actually all ready to go. Actually, that'd be 22. They were ready to go, and they were a team in this league, which had then changed its name to the National Football League. And again, they began to win. They began to win. But let me tell you a little bit about how that all went. I'll just read you a little piece from the book here. So at the end of 1922, they had 4 wins and 3 losses. But the problem was they had lost money. They guaranteed to pay some other teams for playing, and when it rained, nobody showed up, and they owed all this money. So what they decided to do was to sell stock in the team. And this is what's most interesting about the Packers, is that they are owned by people who own the stock. They're not owned by some, rich billionaire who decides he wants to buy a football team like every other football team. And in fact, every other sports franchise in the major league sports franchise. The Packers are owned by the people. And they'll never be moved from Green Bay for just that reason. So they sold these shares. But then Curly realized if they were going to make good on it, they were going to have to win. And that, in fact, is what they started to do. They started to win. He recruited players, and from 1929 through 1931, the Green Bay Packers were champions in the NFL 3 years in a row. Nobody had ever done that. They won 34 games, lost 5, and tied 2 others. And Curly became famous. He became famous because here was this new sport that was just sort of blossoming, and Curly was the face of it. He was a coach. He played for a while, and then when he stopped playing, he remained the coach. But here's the problem with Curly. He won big time, and passing was a big reason for that. But he wasn't a very nice guy to his players. And what I wrote here is that Curly's players respected and feared him. Many of them didn't like him. One of his good, famous players, Cal Hubbard, said, "They won't be able to find 6 men to bury him. He drove us hard, but we got the job done." Another player, Clark Hinkle, said, "He was the founder, creator, and coach, but I never really liked him, nor respected him. But I gave him 1,000% every time I went out." There was a story in 1929 when the last season that Curly actually played, they were mad at Curly for yelling at them so much. And so when he carried the ball, no one blocked for him, and the opposing players came through and sort of nailed him, tackled him hard because they were mad at him. He was quick to take the credit when things went well, but when they didn't, he was quick to blame other people. It's sort of a bad character fault, But he won. But then what happened was, after a while, other teams caught up. They started passing. They started using the T formation, and all of a sudden, Curly wasn't winning so much. Because he'd been such a star, he went to Hollywood, and he was famous. but he wasn't really giving his attention to the team. In 1950, so after really about 30 years of being with the Packers, he resigned, took a job with the Chicago Cardinals. That didn't work out. He didn't win there. He went to the Washington Redskins. They fired him because he just wasn't really working out. He wasn't able to bring a winner anymore. So then you get to about 1950, it must have been 57 or so, and the Packers are trying to find a new coach. Curly wants the job. He wants to come back. But I might have that year wrong, but it's right about that time. But the Packers are interviewing for a coach. Curly really wants to come back, but instead the Packers hire a different guy. His name was Vince Lombardi. Good thing they didn't hire Curly again. And Vince Lombardi, of course, went on to create this dynasty up in Green Bay, and the Super Bowl trophy is named after him. So Curly was kind of mad about that. And Curly and Vince Lombardi never really liked each other. They were kind of just rivals, you know. Curly had the history, but Lombardi had the present and the wins. But over time, Curly mellowed, got to be, in his 60s, and he did a radio program about the Packers. And he was always very supportive, but he was also kind of a Hollywood guy. He went back and forth between Green Bay and Hollywood, and a lot of people in Green Bay thought he had just sort of, become too fancy for their town. And in 1963, the very first year there was the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Curly was inducted. He was inducted, and as he should have been, because really no one deserves to be in there more than he does for his role in creating the National Football League. And then in 1965, he was coming down. He was going to visit his girlfriend, and he was showing his girlfriend's brother, I think it was, what a new dance he had learned. It was the twist, the twist. And he's out there on the front lawn of his girlfriend's house. He's doing the twist, and he has a heart attack, and he dies. Well, it was a sad day in Green Bay, and soon after that, they renamed the stadium from City Stadium to Lambeau Field, which, although it's gone through some changes, is still, of course, called Lambeau Field in honor of Curly. And you can see his statue if you ever go up there and visit. It's right there. He and Vince Lombardi right there, next to each other. The interesting thing about Curly Lambeau, and I think the book, if you choose to read it, is just to watch the evolution of football. How it went from people playing on just city parks with sacks filled with sand and gravel, and how it went from teams that were just kind of running and at each other to a more finessed kind of play where people were throwing the ball, running around each other, these more complicated kinds of plays. And how, although Curly brought this innovation of passing and was very successful with it, in the end, he couldn't innovate. He sort of stuck to his old way, and when other teams came up with other ideas, he stuck with his old way, and he began to lose. So he had a really good idea to begin with, but then he couldn't change with the times and couldn't remain successful at what he did. But nevertheless, we owe him a huge round of gratitude. Whatever his character flaws may be, he brought and maintained the Packers there in Green Bay. And people have a pride in the Packers, partly because they're a small market team, and because they are not owned just by some rich person. And also because they have all these years of being successful, all the way back to the very beginning of the NFL, great success. And then the Lombardi years, of course. And then, lately with, the Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, always contenders. a great team. People have a huge amount of pride in them, and I do too. I love the fact that the Packers are there and what they do and what they bring to the city. We don't know what's going to happen with football here this spring. We don't know. But we do know that when football does resume, the Packers will be there playing in Lambeau Field for giving the best that they have for all of us. So thank you very much for being here today. I urge you to, one way or another, pick up a copy of that. And I believe there's a way to get some digital editions of it as well. Keep reading and keep supporting the Packers. So thank you very much for being here today. Thanks to the Wisconsin Historical Society Press for sponsoring these things and for keeping Wisconsin's history alive for both grown-ups and for kids who are interested in it. There's this whole series of Badger Biographies. Again, I'll show you one more time. Badger Biographies about, I don't even know how many there are, 30 or 40 about important people in Wisconsin's history. So it makes for good reading before you go back to school and when you get back to school as well. Thank you very much for being here, and go Packers.